Last Christmas, I did something that cost my son his marriage. I don't regret it, though I spent a long time wishing I could say that without my voice breaking. It started with a 7-year-old girl who wasn't mine by blood, a family that treated her like a guest in her own home, and a question she whispered to me on Christmas Eve that I haven't been able to unhear since. Am I not your real granddaughter? I'm 62 years old. I spent 30 years as a family court mediator, sitting across from people whose families had cracked open like eggs. I thought I understood how that happened. I thought I was immune. But it turns out the hardest case I'd ever take wasn't assigned to me by the court. It walked into my living room wearing a coat one size too big, carrying a paper bag from school. My name is Dorothy Sinclair, and this is the story of how I chose a stocking over silence. I'd been hosting Christmas Eve in Stamford since before Nathan was born. 37 years of turkey and cinnamon candles, and the good china my mother left me, which I only brought out once a year because I was terrified someone would chip the gravy boat. The tradition outlasted my husband by 5 years, and honestly, it might outlast me because some rituals aren't about joy anymore. They're about proving the house still works. That year, I set the table for 11. My son Nathan and his wife Rachel, their kids Oliver and Chloe, my daughter Kimberly and her husband, their 2 girls Sophie and Grace. Me at the head, where Gerald used to sit before the heart attack, in the chair I'd reupholstered twice because I couldn't bring myself to replace it. I'd bought gifts for all 5 grandchildren, wrapped them myself. I know people use gift bags now, but there's something about folding paper around corners that settles my hands, and at 62, you learn to protect the things that settle you. Chloe's was a watercolor set, the good kind with real pigment, because that girl had a way of drawing things that made you look twice. I always bought Chloe's gift separately, not because the family asked me to, because nobody else bought her one. That's the kind of thing you tell yourself isn't a pattern. You say Nathan's still adjusting, or Rachel probably handles it, or I'm sure her father sends something. You fill in the blanks with reasons that sound reasonable, because the alternative is admitting something you're not ready to say out loud. 5 stockings hung above the fireplace. Red velvet, white trim, names stitched in gold thread. I'd made them myself over the years, one for each grandchild as they arrived. Nathan, Kimberly, Oliver, Sophie, Grace. I counted them while I straightened the garland. 5. Same as last year. Same as the year before, when Nathan married Rachel and Chloe came into our family with a quiet smile and a way of standing slightly behind her mother, like she was waiting for permission to be in the room. 2 years, 2 Christmases. I'd counted those stockings every December and never added a 6th, and until that night, I'd managed to convince myself that the absence wasn't a choice. It was just something I hadn't gotten around to yet. 30 years of writing down what people said in rooms where they thought no one was keeping score, and somehow I'd failed to keep score in my own living room. Old habits, I told myself. But old habits don't explain why the habit never extended to one particular child. They arrived in the usual order. Kimberly and her family first, always early, always organized. Sophie and Grace tumbling out of the car in matching red dresses. Then Nathan's car in the driveway. Oliver running up the front steps before the engine was off. Rachel behind him carrying a casserole dish and apologizing for being late even though she wasn't. Chloe came last. She was always last. Not because anyone told her to wait, but because she'd learned to. The coat was too big for her. Rachel's old winter coat, hemmed but still loose at the shoulders, and Chloe held a paper bag in both hands, the kind you get from the school craft closet, with something lumpy inside that she'd made herself. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the noise and the warmth and the cousins already fighting over who got to sit nearest the fireplace, and she didn't rush in. She waited until Rachel looked back and said, "Come on, honey." And even then she stepped inside carefully, like she was entering someone else's house, which I suppose she was. While the adults settled in and the turkey finished its last hour, Chloe sat on the sofa near the window. She'd found a piece of wrapping paper that had fallen behind the gift pile's shiny green, a little crumpled, and she was folding it. Small, precise folds, her fingers pressing each crease flat with her thumbnail. She was making a bird, a crane, the kind you learn from a YouTube video and practice until the wings come out right, except hers didn't. The wings were slightly crooked, one side longer than the other, and she held it up to the light and studied it with the kind of seriousness that doesn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. I picked it up after she set it down on the armrest. The paper was warm from her hands. I placed it on the windowsill next to the candle, where it caught the light from outside and threw a tiny shadow shaped like something trying to fly. "That's pretty, Chloe," I said. She looked up at me with those dark eyes, Rachel's eyes, and smiled. But it was the kind of smile that had practice in it, the kind that a child learns when she figures out that being easy is safer than being honest. "Thank you, Dot," she said. She was the only person in the world who called me that. Nathan called me Mom. Kimberly called me Mother when she was being formal, and Mom when she wasn't. The grandchildren called me Grandma or Nana, but Chloe had tried Grandma once, early on, and something in the room had shifted, some silence from some direction I couldn't pin down, and after that she just called me Dot. I never corrected her. Part of me liked it. Part of me understood what it meant, and that part I kept quiet. Dinner was fine. Dinner is always fine. That's the thing about families like mine, we're very good at fine. After dinner, we moved to the living room for gifts. This was Rachel's job. She liked organizing things, liked being useful, and Nathan had a way of letting her handle the details while he settled into the armchair with his eggnog, like a man who'd earned the right to watch. I'd seen that posture before. Gerald used to sit exactly like that on Christmas Eve, legs crossed, drink in hand, the posture of a man who believes his presence is contribution enough. Rachel knelt beside the tree and started pulling out packages, reading names, handing them to small reaching hands. She had a system she always did. Biggest boxes first, then the small ones, then the stocking stuffers. She moved through the pile with the kind of focused energy of someone who needs to be doing something, and the children responded the way children do, tearing paper, squealing, holding things up for approval. "Sophie, this one's yours, careful. It's heavy." Sophie ripped it open and screamed about a doll. "Grace, here you go, sweetie." Grace already had wrapping paper in her hair. "Oliver, this is from Daddy." Oliver grabbed it with both hands and ran to Nathan, who pulled the boy onto his lap and helped him with the tape. I was counting. I didn't mean to, it's a habit from work, the way some people tap their foot or crack their knuckles. In mediations, I used to count who spoke and who didn't, who got interrupted and who did the interrupting, because the numbers always told a story the words were trying to hide. So I counted. Sophie, 3 gifts. Grace, 3 gifts. Oliver, 4, including 1 from each set of grandparents. Kimberly's girls got gifts from Nathan's pile. Oliver got a gift from Kimberly's pile. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone was seen. Chloe sat next to me on the sofa. She hadn't moved since the gift-giving started. Her hands were folded in her lap, the way children fold their hands in church, not because they want to, but because they've learned that stillness makes them smaller, and smaller means less likely to be noticed for the wrong reasons. She watched each name get called the way you watch a raffle where you already know your ticket isn't in the bowl. Rachel reached the last few packages. She pulled one out, checked the tag, handed it to Grace. Reached again, checked, handed it to Oliver. Then she stood up, brushed off her knees, and started gathering the torn wrapping paper into a trash bag. She was done. She moved around the room, collecting paper and ribbon, stepping over boxes, smiling at the chaos, and at no point, not one single moment, did she pause, look around, and realize that her own daughter had not received a single gift from under that tree. Rachel didn't skip Chloe on purpose. That's what made it so much worse. She skipped her the way you skip, a step you've stopped seeing because it had been ordinary for so long that it had become invisible, and invisible things don't need explaining. Nobody else noticed either. Nathan sipped his eggnog. Kimberly scrolled her phone. The other children compared toys. The room was full of noise and warmth, and not one adult in it registered the silence of the child, sitting next to me with her hands still folded. I reached behind the sofa for the gift I'd wrapped separately, the watercolor set, the good one, in paper I'd chosen specifically because it had birds on it, and Chloe liked birds. I handed it to her. "This one's from me, sweetheart." Chloe took it carefully. "The way you handle something you're not sure is really yours." She unwrapped it slowly. No tearing, no squealing, just careful fingers along the tape, and when she saw what was inside, her eyes went wide and bright for exactly 2 seconds before she rearranged her face back into that practiced smile. "Thank you, Dot," she said. Quiet, polite. The voice of a child who has learned that gratitude should be measured, not loud, because loud might draw the wrong kind of attention. And then she leaned into me, her shoulder against my arm, and said something so softly, I almost didn't catch it. "Am I not your real granddaughter?" My body understood before my brain did. Something locked in my chest. Not pain exactly, but the feeling right before pain. The way the air goes still before a sound you don't want to hear. I looked down at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even sad. Not in the way adults understand sadness. She was asking a genuine question. The way children ask why the sky is blue or where dogs go when they die, because she truly didn't know the answer and she thought I might. "Why would you ask me that, sweetheart?" She looked at the fireplace, at the stockings, 5 names in gold thread. "Because I never get a stocking." Simple, factual. The logic of a 7-year-old who has looked at the evidence and drawn the only conclusion available to her. If there are 5 stockings and 5 grandchildren, and she is not one of the 5, then she must not be one of the grandchildren. Clean math. Devastating math. I knelt down, my knees protested, the way 62-year-old knees do, and I took both her hands. "You're my favorite," I said, and I meant it. I meant it more than I'd meant most things I'd said in a life spent carefully measuring my words for other people's benefit. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough, because being someone's favorite doesn't fix the fact that your name isn't on the wall. Chloe smiled. A real one, this time small and quick, like a bird landing on a branch and taking off again before you're sure it was there. Then she went back to her watercolors, and I went to the kitchen to finish cleaning up, and the evening folded itself back into the shape of normal. Later, after everyone had gone home and I was washing the good china by hand, because you can't put those plates in the dishwasher no matter what anyone says, a voice surfaced in my head. Not mine, Gerald's. That low, even tone he used when he wanted a conversation. To end not angry, never angry, just done. "Family is family, Dot. Don't overthink it." I'd heard that sentence 100 times in 35 years of marriage. After every holiday where he forgot a birthday. After every school play he skipped. After the night Nathan cried at the dinner table because his father hadn't come to his baseball game, and Gerald said, without looking up from his newspaper, that the boy needed to toughen up. Family is family. It was Gerald's way of saying, this is how things are, and your job is to make peace with it. I'd made peace with it for 35 years. And standing at that sink, with my hands in warm water and my son's house silent behind me, I heard that sentence again. And for the first time in my life, it didn't sound like wisdom. It sounded like a lock. I dried my hands, turned off the kitchen light, walked past the fireplace with its 5 stockings, stopped, counted them one more time, because counting is what I do. It's always what I've done, and the numbers always tell the truth even when people don't. 5 stockings, 2 years, 1 name missing. I went to bed, and all night long, a small voice played on repeat behind my closed eyes. Not asking for much, not asking for everything, just asking the simplest question in the world with an answer that should have been obvious. Because I never get a stocking. I called Nathan the next morning. Not because I had a plan, because I couldn't sit with it any longer. And 30 years of mediating other people's problems had given me an almost physical need to name things out loud, as if saying a problem clearly enough could start solving it by force of articulation. "Come have coffee," I said. "Just us." He came. He always came when I asked which. Looking back, might have been part of it. Nathan was good at showing up. He was good at the gestures that looked like love from the outside. The phone call on Mother's Day, the casserole when I had the flu, the arm around my shoulder at Gerald's funeral. He performed closeness so well that it took me 2 years to notice he'd never once performed it toward a 7-year-old girl living in his house. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured his coffee the way he likes it, black, 1 sugar, a habit he picked up from Gerald, though he'd never admit it, and I said what I came to say. Chloe didn't have a stocking, Nathan. She didn't get a gift from the family. She's been with us 2 Christmases now. He didn't flinch. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me with that steady, patient expression he uses in client meetings. The one that says, "I hear you, I take you seriously, and I'm about to explain why you're wrong. Mom, she has a stocking at her dad's house. We talked about this, we can't duplicate everything. It sends mixed signals. And honestly, Rachel handles the gifts. If there was an oversight, that's something Rachel and I will sort out." He shrugged, one shoulder, casual. "It's not a pattern, it's just logistics." Logistics. He called it logistics. I'd spent 30 years listening to people reframe cruelty as practicality. And my son had just done it so smoothly that for a moment, and I'm ashamed of this, I almost believed him. I pushed, because the mediator in me doesn't know how to leave a loose thread alone. "Nathan, it's not just the stocking. Chloe sits on the outside of every gathering. She doesn't get mentioned in the family group text. Mom." He set the mug down. Still calm, still warm. But there was something underneath it now. The way there's something underneath a lake that looks perfectly flat until you notice the current. "I think you're projecting. I know Dad wasn't great with the emotional stuff, and I understand you see things through that lens. But I'm not Dad. I'm doing my best. Chloe is adjusting. Rachel is happy. Maybe." He paused, and the pause was calibrated. I could tell, the way a good mediator pauses before delivering the line that reframes the entire conversation. "Maybe the person who isn't adjusting is you," he said it gently. That's what made it so effective. Not an accusation, a concern. A son worried about his aging mother, who might be seeing problems where there aren't any, who might be projecting old wounds onto new people, who might need to relax and let things take their natural course. He even reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I drove home with the windows down, even though it was January, because I needed cold air on my face to think clearly, and I couldn't think clearly because Nathan had done something I'd watched 400 spouses do in mediations. He'd taken my observation, flipped it into my problem, and handed it back to me gift-wrapped in tenderness. And I, Dorothy Sinclair, 30 years on the bench, had accepted it. Was I projecting? Gerald had been dead for 5 years. Maybe I was seeing his ghost in places it didn't belong. Maybe Nathan really was just a busy man doing his best with a blended family, and the stockings were, in fact, logistics, and the missing gift was Rachel's oversight, and Chloe's question was just a child being dramatic in the way children sometimes are. I almost let it go. I was halfway to letting it go. Then I called my friend Evelyn, because Evelyn has never let me get away with anything in 40 years, and I needed someone who wouldn't be gentle about it. Evelyn Marsh is 65, retired family therapist, and the only person I know who can drink an entire pot of Earl Grey in one sitting and still sleep 8 hours. She listened to everything, the stockings, the gift, Chloe's question, Nathan's explanation without interrupting, which for Evelyn is practically an act of restraint. When I finished, she set down her cup and said, "Dot, you didn't retire from the bench. You just moved the courtroom home. The question is whether you're going to keep sitting in the gallery or finally take the stand. He's my son, Ev, not a respondent. Honey, the man who sounds the most reasonable in a mediation is usually the one who's been rehearsing." She refilled her cup. "You mediated 400 divorces and you can't see through your own son's deflection? I am genuinely embarrassed for you. I prefer professionally compromised. I prefer in denial. But we can workshop the phrasing later." She looked at me over the rim of her cup, and her voice changed softer now, the therapist underneath the wit. "Dorothy, You know what you saw. The question isn't whether you're right. The question is what you're going to do about it now that you can't unsee it. I didn't answer. But I didn't argue either, which Evelyn correctly interpreted as progress. That Saturday, I took Chloe for ice cream. I'd asked Rachel if it was okay, and Rachel had said yes with the slightly surprised gratitude of a woman who wasn't used to people asking to spend time with her daughter. We went to the place on Bedford Street, with the 2 small tables and the paper placemats that come with a cup of crayons. Chloe ordered strawberry with sprinkles and ate it methodically, outside in, the way she did everything carefully, like she was trying not to take up too much space. While I finished my coffee, she drew on the placemat. A house, green lawn, a door with a wreath on it. Inside the house, through the windows she'd drawn, 3 figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. Nathan, Rachel, Oliver, clear as day. And outside the house, on the lawn, standing alone with what might have been a backpack or might have been a paper bag, a 4th figure, smaller than the rest. No one holding her hand. Chloe didn't explain the drawing. She didn't need to. She just pushed the placemat toward me when she was done and said, "You can keep it if you want, Dot." I folded it carefully along the creases, the way you fold something that matters, and put it in my wallet, behind my driver's license, where I keep the things I need to carry with me. Later that evening, putting away Christmas decorations, I opened the craft supply box looking for twine and found the velvet. Red. Soft. The leftover from the stockings I'd made years ago, rolled into a neat cylinder and tucked in the corner. Enough for one more. I held it in both hands for a long time, running my thumb along the grain before I set it back down and closed the lid. Not yet. But soon. A week later, I drove to Nathan's house with a Tupperware of beef stew and a reason I'd practiced in the car. Just dropping off leftovers, I made too much. I hadn't made too much. I'd made exactly the right amount, and then doubled it, so I'd have an excuse to ring the doorbell while my son was at work. Rachel opened the door in paint-stained jeans and a ponytail that was losing its battle with gravity. She was surprised. She was always surprised when I came over. The way people are surprised by things that should be normal but aren't. And she let me in with the kind of warmth that made me want to hug her and shake her at the same time. "Nathan's at the office," she said, taking the Tupperware. "But come in, I just made coffee." I said I needed the bathroom first, which was true enough. 62 and a 40-minute drive will do that to you. But the bathroom wasn't really why I'd come. I walked down the hallway slowly, the way I used to walk through clients' houses during home assessments, when the court needed someone to look at a living situation and report back on what the walls were saying. Oliver's room was first on the left, door open. His name spelled out in wooden letters above the door frame, the kind you buy at a craft store and paint by hand, each letter a different color. Inside, a bookshelf organized by height, a bin of trucks, a rug shaped like a racetrack, a nightlight shaped like a rocket, a child's room that said "You are here, you are known, you are built into the architecture of this house." Chloe's room was at the end of the hall. No name on the door. I almost walked past it, that's how small the door was. Or maybe that's how trained my eyes had become to not notice things I didn't want to see. I pushed it open. The room was half the size of Oliver's. A twin bed with a purple comforter, a small desk with school papers stacked neatly, and a window that faced the side of the neighbor's fence. Not the backyard, not the street, just 6 feet of wooden slats, and nothing beyond. But what I noticed, what made me stand in that doorway and forget to breathe, was the ceiling. Dozens of origami cranes hung from threads pinned to the ceiling with thumbtacks. Paper cranes in every color, notebook paper, construction paper, wrapping paper, napkins, pages torn from magazines. Some had careful, even folds. Some were crooked, wings bent at wrong angles. They turned slowly in the draft from the heating vent, and standing underneath them was like standing inside a quiet, patient migration birds going nowhere, waiting for a wind that hadn't come. Chloe made cranes when she was anxious. I knew that now. And looking at the ceiling of that small room at the end of the hall, at the sheer number of them, weeks and weeks of small fingers pressing paper into the shape of something that could fly. I understood exactly how long she'd been anxious, and exactly how little anyone in this house had thought to ask why. I went back to the kitchen. Coffee was ready. Rachel sat across from me at the island, and I asked the question I'd come to ask, the way I used to ask questions in session, casual, almost offhand, like the answer didn't matter much. How's Chloe's dad doing? Does he visit often? Rachel's face did something complicated. A flicker of something that might have been confusion, or might have been guilt, or might have been the expression of a woman who hadn't thought about the question long enough to know which one it was. Actually, he hasn't called in months. Nathan talked to him a while back, I think last spring. He said Chloe was settling in with us, and that too many transitions would confuse her. They agreed to give it some time. She paused. I think it was the right call. Chloe seems fine. They agreed. 2 words. In 30 years of family court, I'd heard hundreds of people say we agreed when what they meant was one of us decided, and the other one wasn't in the room. My hands were steady on the coffee cup, but my pulse was doing something else entirely, because what Rachel had just described without knowing it, without understanding the shape of what she was handing me, was an isolation pattern. Textbook. Chapter 4 of every family law training I'd ever taught. Cut the child off from one parent, control the narrative with the other. Make it sound mutual. Make it sound reasonable. Make it sound like logistics. Chloe wasn't just being excluded from Christmas at the Sinclair house. Chloe was being cut off from her biological father, at Nathan's initiative, with Rachel's unknowing cooperation. This child was losing both families at once, slowly, quietly, the way Nathan did everything, and the only person who'd noticed was a 7-year-old who asked her step-grandmother why she didn't have a stocking. I didn't push Rachel further. I knew from experience that if you push too hard before someone is ready, they don't open, they seal. I finished my coffee, thanked her for hosting me, and drove home. I got halfway there before I had to pull over. I stopped in the parking lot of the CVS on Summer Street, turned off the engine, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel while the car ticked and cooled around me. The rearview mirror was tilted at an angle where I could see my own face, and what I saw there wasn't anger or shock or righteousness. It was recognition, because I knew this story. I'd lived inside it for 35 years. Gerald never hit me. Gerald never yelled. Gerald just narrowed things. Slowly. The dinner parties we stopped hosting. The college friend I stopped calling because Gerald said she was a lot. The sister I saw less and less because visits were complicated. None of it was dramatic. None of it was cruel enough to name. It was just reduction, year by year, until the world was the size of our house, and Gerald's approval was the only weather that mattered, and I called that devotion because the alternative was admitting that I'd spent 3 decades inside a life that was shrinking. And now, my son, who poured coffee for his wife and organized his spreadsheets and spoke to me in that calm, patient voice, was doing the same thing to a 7-year-old girl. Not with fists, not with shouting, with stockings and seating charts and a phone call to a man who loved his daughter, telling him she didn't want to see him. I hadn't just failed to stop this. I'd helped build the blueprint. Every time I'd told Nathan that his father wasn't great with emotional stuff, every time I'd smoothed over Gerald's silence and repackaged it as personality, instead of what it actually was, I'd been teaching my son that indifference could be dressed up and called something else. And he'd learned the lesson so well, he'd improved on it. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened the old notebook, the one with the leather cover and the good binding, the one I'd used for 30 years of case notes in rooms where families came apart, and it was my job to count the pieces. I turned to a blank page and wrote at the top, in the handwriting that court reporters used to say was the neatest they'd ever seen, Sinclair Family Case Notes. My hand shook when I wrote my son's name under respondent, but I wrote it. Then I picked up the phone and called my estate lawyer. The estate lawyer's name was Patricia Hoffman, and she had the kind of face that had heard everything twice. I sat across from her desk in downtown Stamford with my notebook open and explained what I wanted. A trust fund in Chloe's name, funded from my estate, earmarked for education and housing, accessible when she turned 18. Rachel Keane listed as trustee, not Nathan. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. You're sure about the trustee designation? Your son is the biological. My son is the reason I'm sitting here. She nodded, the way lawyers nod when they've decided to stop asking questions and start drafting documents. I gave her the details, signed the preliminary paperwork, and drove home with a feeling I hadn't had in months, the particular satisfaction of watching a plan take shape on paper, which is the closest thing a retired mediator has to job fulfillment. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued doing what I'd done for 30 years in courtrooms. I gathered evidence. Not dramatically, no hidden cameras, no confrontations, just notes. Every phone call with Nathan, I wrote down what he said, exactly as he said it, the same way I used to transcribe respondents in session. Chloe's adjusting at her own pace. We don't push. January 9th. She's got her own thing going, she's fine. January 14th. The words sounded different when you saw them written down in sequence. In conversation, each one was reasonable. On paper, lined up one after another, they read like a wall being built one brick at a time. I knew I needed to talk to Rachel. Not about Nathan, not yet, but about Chloe's father. If what Rachel had told me was true, if Nathan had unilaterally cut off contact between Chloe and her biological dad, then Rachel needed to know, and she needed to hear it from someone who wasn't trying to manage her. We met at the coffee shop on Atlantic Street, the one with the good scones and the tables far enough apart that you can have a conversation without performing for the next table over. Rachel came in looking tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep and ordered chamomile tea, which she held with both hands without drinking. I started gently. Rachel, I've been thinking about Chloe's dad. Have you talked to him directly? Not through Nathan, just you and him? The change was immediate. Rachel's shoulders went back, her chin lifted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice had an edge. I'd never heard from her before. Not anger exactly, but something rehearsed. Something she'd been given the words for. Dorothy, with all due respect, Nathan is a good husband. He works hard. He provides for all of us, including Chloe. She has a roof over her head. She goes to a good school. She has everything she needs. I recognized the phrasing. He provides. He works hard. Everything she needs. These weren't Rachel's words. They were Nathan's, the same inventory he'd recited to me in my kitchen, the same list of logistical adequacies that was supposed to substitute for the thing Chloe was actually missing. Rachel had absorbed his language so completely that she was defending him with his own script and didn't know it. Everything except a place in the family photo, I said quietly. Rachel set her cup down. You don't understand our marriage. Nathan isn't. He's not perfect, but he's trying. It takes time with blended families. You can't force these things. Rachel, how much time does a 7-year-old have? Something moved behind her eyes fast, like a fish turning under the surface, and for a moment I thought she might stay. But instead she picked up her bag and stood. I think I should go. I appreciate your concern, Dorothy, but this is between Nathan and me. She left. I sat with my cold coffee and my untouched scone and did what I always did after a session that went badly. I wrote down exactly what was said, including the parts that hurt, because the record doesn't care about your feelings, and that's what makes it useful. In 30 years of mediation, I'd learned that the most dangerous sentence in family law is he's trying. It means nobody stopped to ask. Trying what exactly? That evening, I FaceTimed Chloe. We'd started a routine every night before bed. 10 minutes, she'd show me whatever she'd made that day, and I'd pretend to be amazed, which wasn't hard because I usually was. That night, she held up a new crane, turning it slowly in front of the camera so I could see both sides. The wings are better now, Dot. I practiced on like 20 of them. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can I see you this weekend? I'll make those pancakes you like, the ones with the faces. Her expression shifted. Not collapsed. Chloe didn't collapse, she adjusted. The way a plant bends around an obstacle instead of breaking against it. Daddy Nathan said I can't go to your house this week. He said you need space. She paused. Do you need space, Dot? My hand tightened on the phone until I could feel the edge of the case pressing into my palm. He was cutting my access. Quiet, clean. No argument, no confrontation, just a gentle suggestion relayed through a 7-year-old, so that if I objected, I'd be the one making it difficult. I don't need space from you, I said, keeping my voice even. Not ever. I'll figure it out, okay? Okay. She held the crane up one more time. I made this one for you. I'll bring it when I come. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, looking at the 5 stockings above the fireplace and the origami crane on the windowsill and the red velvet in the craft box that I still hadn't touched. Everything in my house was waiting for me to do something. I just didn't know if I had enough to do it with. The phone rang at 11. Rachel's name on the screen. I answered without saying hello, because when someone calls you at 11 on a weeknight, the silence before they speak is the most important part. She breathed. Then, I went through Nathan's phone tonight. There are texts to Chloe's dad from last spring. Nathan told him Chloe doesn't want visits anymore, that she's settled and transitions would be harmful. A long pause. Chloe never said that, Dorothy. She asks about her dad every single week. She drew him a birthday card last month that's still sitting on her desk because she has no way to send it. The birthday card. I hadn't known about the birthday card. It hit harder than anything else, harder than the stockings, harder than the cranes. Because a birthday card means a child is still reaching for someone, still believing they can touch the person who's been removed from their life. And the card sitting unsent on a desk means nobody helped her mail it. Why would he do that? Rachel asked. Her voice was very small. What do you think? I said. Because a good mediator never answers the question the client already knows the answer to. She didn't respond. But she didn't hang up either. We sat in silence for almost a full minute, 2 women on either end of a phone line, 30 years apart in age, arriving at the same terrible understanding at different speeds. Then Rachel said, I need to think, and the line went quiet, and I stood in my kitchen at midnight, holding a dead phone, and knowing with absolute certainty that thinking was exactly what Nathan had spent 2 years making sure Rachel never had time to do. Nathan showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning, which was how I knew it was serious. Nathan never took time off work for anything less than a crisis, and the fact that he was standing on my porch at 9:15 in business casual, with a coffee from the good place on Main Street, meant he'd planned this visit the way he planned everything, carefully, with the appearance of casualness. Kimberly told me you've been meeting with a lawyer, he said before I'd finished opening the door. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. Kimberly had always been the easier current to follow. She'd spent her whole life navigating between what she knew was right and what was safe, and safe had won every time. I couldn't blame her entirely. I'd taught her that math. Come in, I said, because whatever was about to happen needed walls around it. He stepped inside and closed the door himself. Not slammed, not aggressive, just a firm click that said this conversation has boundaries and I'm the one setting them. He walked to the kitchen, set his coffee on the counter, and turned to face me with his arms crossed. Still calm. Still measured. Nathan in a suit jacket with his sleeves rolled up, looking like a man about to deliver a quarterly earnings report that wasn't good news, but wasn't his fault. What exactly are you planning, Mom? I'm updating my estate plan. It's my right. To do what? The calm was still there, but the temperature underneath it had dropped. To give my inheritance Dad's money to a kid who isn't even a Sinclair. There it was. Isn't even a Sinclair. Not my stepdaughter, not Chloe, not even Rachel's daughter. A kid who isn't even a Sinclair, as though belonging were a bloodline, and that bloodline ran through him alone, as though he were the gatekeeper of a name I'd carried longer than he'd been alive. She's been a Sinclair since you married her mother, I said, on paper. That doesn't mean, Nathan, what does it mean then? Tell me, because I've been trying to figure out your definition of family for 2 months, and I keep coming up short. And that's when the mask came off. Not all at once, Nathan was too practiced for that. It peeled back in layers, the way paint curls when you apply heat. First, the smile went flat. Then the warmth left his eyes. Then his voice dropped into a register I hadn't heard from him before. Low, quiet, precise. The voice of a man who is not asking. Listen to me carefully, Mom. He uncrossed his arms and placed both hands flat on the counter, leaning forward. If you change, if you put that girl's name anywhere near Dad's estate, I will make sure you never see Oliver again. Not on weekends. Not on holidays. Not on his birthday. Not at all. He let that land. He was watching my face the way I used to watch respondents' faces when the mediator said something designed to provoke, looking for the flinch, the crack, the moment the other side reveals what they can't afford to lose. And I'll talk to Kimberly, he continued. Sophie and Grace too. You want to choose someone else's kid over your own grandchildren? Fine, but understand what you're choosing. You'll lose all of them. 5 grandchildren, 5 names in gold thread, on 5 stockings above the fireplace behind me. I could feel them there without turning around, the way you feel a door you're about to have shut in your face. Nathan straightened up, rolled his shoulders back. And then he did the thing that nearly broke me. He slid the mask back on. The warmth returned to his voice, the reasonable tone, the posture of a son who loves his mother and is simply trying to protect his family from her well-intentioned overreach. He even softened his expression, not a smile, but the ghost of one, the suggestion that this was all just a misunderstanding that could be resolved if I would simply be reasonable. Family is family, Mom. Don't overthink it. My body understood before my brain did. Everything locked: lungs, hands, jaw, the muscles along my spine that hold you upright when the ground shifts. Because I'd heard those words before, not similar words. Not words in the same spirit. Those exact words, in that exact cadence, with that exact slight tilt of the head, and they'd come from a man who'd been dead for 5 years and whose chair I still couldn't bring myself to replace. Gerald, standing in this kitchen, same counter, same posture, 30 years ago, telling me not to make a fuss about the way he'd spoken to Nathan at dinner, the way he'd looked right through the boy who'd just wanted to tell him about a baseball game. Family is family, Dot. Don't overthink it. My son had his father's hands. I'd always known that. But standing in my kitchen at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, I learned that he also had his father's voice, and his father's arithmetic, the kind that counts some people as family and subtracts the rest, and calls it love. Nathan left. He kissed my cheek on the way out, because Nathan always kisses my cheek, because that's what good sons do, and Nathan is very good at doing what good sons do. Kimberly called that evening. Her voice had the thin quality of someone who's been rehearsing an apology without committing to it. Mom, I'm sorry I told him, but you have to understand he's scared. He thinks you're punishing him. Kim, have you ever looked at Chloe's room in that house? Silence. The kind of silence that has an answer inside it. Mom, please, don't do this. You'll tear this family apart. When did this family start meaning only the people Nathan approves of? She hung up. I stood there holding the phone, and I understood that Kimberly wasn't choosing Nathan's side. She was choosing the same thing I'd chosen for 35 years, the side that costs the least. I couldn't even be angry about it. I'd written that playbook. The house was very quiet after that. I sat at the kitchen table with the case notebook open in front of me, and Gerald's photo on the shelf across the room, the one from our anniversary, the one where he's smiling and his hand is on my shoulder, and you'd never know from looking at it that he hadn't spoken to me for 3 days before the photographer arrived. I did the math. Nathan, Kimberly, Oliver, Sophie, Grace. 5 people. One side of the scale, Chloe, 1 child. The other side. In 30 years of mediation, I never took a case where the numbers were this uneven. You learn early on that the math matters, that when you're counting what you stand to lose versus what you stand to gain, the bigger number usually wins, because humans are wired to preserve what they have, even when what they have is making them small. I picked up the origami crane from the windowsill. Crooked wings, uneven folds, made by small hands that were trying very hard to get something right in a house where nothing was designed for her. 5 against 1. The math was terrible. But in 30 years of family court, I'd also learned this. The person with the fewest people on their side is almost always the person who needs you most. And the math that counts people isn't the math that matters. The math that matters is the one that counts what you can live with. I could live without Sunday dinners. I could live without birthday parties and school plays and the sound of Oliver's feet on my hardwood floors. It would hurt. It would hurt in the specific, physical way that absence hurts, the way a house gets louder when it empties out. But I could not live with a 7-year-old girl who asked me if she was real, and I said nothing. Have you ever been told you were tearing a family apart when all you were doing was refusing to pretend it was whole? I closed the notebook. I went to the craft supply box. I took out the red velvet, and I started sewing. I waited 3 weeks, not because I was afraid, though I was, in the specific way you're afraid of something you've already decided to do, but because I needed the trust documents finalized, the stocking finished, and my hands to stop shaking when I thought about what I was going to say to my son in front of his family. The shaking stopped on a Wednesday. By Sunday, I was ready. I invited everyone for dinner. I miss you all, I said on the phone, which was true in the way that missing someone can also be a kind of grieving for who you thought they were. Nathan came, he had to, because refusing a Sunday dinner at his mother's house would crack the image he'd spent 35 years building, and image was the currency Nathan couldn't afford to devalue. Rachel came, quieter than usual, holding Chloe's hand in a way she hadn't before Christmas. Kimberly came with her family, looking at me the way you look at someone holding a match near a curtain. I cooked. I set the table. I poured wine. I asked about school and work, and whether Sophie had gotten over her cold. I was warm and present and attentive, and if anyone noticed that the bag by my chair was heavier than a purse should be, nobody mentioned it. The children finished first and went to the den to watch something loud. The adults stayed at the table with coffee. The house smelled like roast chicken and cinnamon, and everything was fine, because everything in this family was always fine until someone decided it wasn't. Before anyone leaves, I said, setting down my cup, there's something I need to share. Nathan's coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. Rachel went still. Kimberly's husband suddenly became very interested in his phone. I reached into the bag and took out the notebook leather cover, good binding, 30 years of case notes in other people's disasters, and I opened it to the page where my own family's disaster began. I put on my reading glasses, the same gesture I'd made 10,000 times in mediation rooms, in courthouses, across conference tables, where people's marriages came apart while I kept the record. Nathan had seen me do it as a child, sitting in the back of my office after school, watching me work. He knew what the glasses meant. His jaw tightened. December 24th, I read. Christmas Eve. Gift distribution. 5 grandchildren received presents from the family. 1 did not. The omission was not questioned by any adult present. I looked up briefly, including me. I continued, date by date, gathering by gathering. Thanksgiving, Chloe seated at the folding table in the kitchen while the other children sat at the dining room. Nathan's birthday in October, the invitation text that went to the family group chat, Chloe's name, had never been added to. The 4th of July picnic where Chloe sat on the blanket alone while the cousins played in the sprinklers, and not one adult said, "Go play with them, honey." 7 gatherings across 2 years, 7 documented exclusions. I read them the way I'd read findings in session, neutral, precise, without editorializing, because the facts didn't need my help. They were damning enough on their own. Nathan's smile had been thinning with each entry, and by the 4th one it was gone entirely. "Mom, this is insane. You've been keeping a file on your own family." "I kept files on 400 families in 30 years, Nathan. Yours is no different, except it took me longer to open. This is your twisting things. These are normal family situations. Kids sit at different tables. Not everyone gets added to every group text. You're making it sound..." "In October," I said, not raising my voice, because I'd learned decades ago that the person who stays quietest in a mediation is the person who controls the room. You contacted Chloe's biological father. You told him that Chloe did not want visits. That transitions were confusing her. I closed the notebook and looked at Rachel. Chloe was never asked. She asks about her father every week. She drew him a birthday card last month that is still sitting on her desk because nobody in your house helped her send it. The room changed. Rachel turned to Nathan with an expression I'd seen hundreds of times across mediation tables, the expression of someone whose understanding of their own life has just shifted under their feet, like a rug pulled so slowly they didn't feel it moving until someone pointed at the bare floor. You told me they agreed, Rachel said. It was for her own. She asks about him every week, Nathan. Every week. And you told me he didn't want to come. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He was cycling now, I could see the gears. The same gears I'd watched turn in 400 respondents who'd run out of reasonable explanations and were reaching for anything that might still work. Denial, deflection, blame. She's adjusting, he said. But the words sounded hollow now, even to him. I was protecting. You were deciding, I said. You've been deciding who belongs in this family since the day you married Rachel, and you've been doing it so quietly that Rachel learned to do it too. I reached into the bag again and placed the family photo on the table, the one from his living room wall. Nathan and Oliver smiling. 2 people. When did Rachel and Chloe become invisible in your house, Nathan? Because I've looked at this photo and I cannot find them. Nathan looked at Kimberly. Kimberly looked at the table. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and she did not speak, and her silence was louder than anything she could have said, because it was the same silence I'd kept for 35 years, and we both knew it. You're choosing her over your own son? Nathan's voice cracked on the last word, not with sadness, but with something rawer, something that sounded almost like a boy who'd been told his baseball game didn't matter. For 1 second, I saw him the child underneath the consultant, the boy who'd learned from his father that love was conditional and had simply applied the lesson to the next generation. My heart broke for that boy. But the boy was not the man sitting in front of me, and the man in front of me had a 7-year-old sleeping on my couch who deserved better than the blueprint he'd inherited. I'm choosing the child that everyone in this room, including me, overlooked for 2 years. Then I stood up. I reached into the bag one more time and pulled out the stocking. Red velvet, white trim, gold thread. Chloe stitched by hand over 3 weeks. Each letter pressed flat with the iron, the way my mother taught me, because some things you can't rush if you want them to hold. I walked to the fireplace. I hung it on the 6th hook, the hook that had been empty for 2 years, waiting for a name I should have stitched a long time ago. I didn't say anything. The stocking said it. I've updated my estate plan, I said, turning back to the table. There is now an education and housing trust in Chloe's name. Rachel is the trustee. The details are with my lawyer, and they are not negotiable. Nathan stared at the stocking, then at me, then at Rachel, looking for the ally he'd always found there. The wife who agreed with his framing, who absorbed his language, who handed out presents without noticing her own daughter wasn't getting one. But Rachel wasn't looking at Nathan. Rachel was looking through the doorway to the den, where Chloe had fallen asleep on the sofa with a paper crane in her hand and her shoes still on, because nobody had told her she could take them off. I handed out every gift that night, Rachel said, and her voice was steady and broken at the same time, the way a thing can be both when it's finally telling the truth. Every single one. And I didn't give one to my own daughter. She pressed her hand flat against the table, and I didn't notice. That was the moment. Not the notebook, not the will, not the stocking. The moment was a 32-year-old woman looking at her sleeping child and understanding with the kind of clarity that burns that she had been so thoroughly shaped by her husband's framework that she had become its instrument, and her daughter had paid the price. Nobody spoke. The house settled around us, the way houses do when something has shifted inside them that can't be put back. Nathan stood up, took his coat, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob and looked back at me, and for a moment his face was so much like Gerald's that my breath caught. He left without saying goodbye. The door closed with the same firm click it had made when he'd arrived at my house weeks ago to deliver his threat, only this time he was on the other side of it. Rachel didn't go home that night. She and Chloe stayed at my house, Chloe in the guest room, that still smelled like lavender sachets because I hadn't changed them since Gerald died, and Rachel on the sofa with a blanket I brought her at 2 in the morning when I heard her crying and pretending she wasn't. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay. I've spent too many years in rooms where people said that to believe it helps. I just put the blanket around her shoulders and sat with her until the crying wore itself out, which is sometimes the only useful thing another person can do. In the morning, Chloe was at the kitchen table before either of us. She'd found a box of cereal and poured herself a bowl, only spilling a little, and she was drawing on a napkin with a pen she'd taken from the cup by the phone. The drawing was a bird, wings slightly uneven. She looked up when I came in and smiled. Not the practice smile, not the polite one, but the kind that shows up when a child feels safe enough to stop performing. "Morning, Dot," she said, and went back to her bird. Rachel sat down across from me with coffee she'd made too strong, which I drank without comment because there are mornings when bad coffee is a form of solidarity. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me with eyes that were swollen but steady, the face of a woman who'd spent the night dismantling something she'd built her life on, and was now sitting in the rubble trying to figure out which pieces were worth keeping. "I handed out every gift that night," she said, "and I didn't even notice she wasn't getting one." She looked at Chloe, who was concentrating on getting the bird's beak right. What kind of mother doesn't notice that? The kind who's been told so many times that it's normal. She stopped questioning it. I set my cup down. I was that kind of wife for 35 years, Rachel. Every time Gerald was cold and I said, "That's just how he is." Every time I made excuses instead of making noise, I was doing exactly what you did. The only difference is I didn't see it until I was 62, and my husband was already in the ground. I looked at her. "You're seeing it at 32. Don't waste the head start." She didn't answer right away. She watched Chloe draw, and something moved across her face. Not guilt anymore, but something quieter. The beginning of a promise she was making to herself, the kind you don't say out loud because saying it would make it feel smaller than it is. Nathan called at noon. I answered in the kitchen with the door closed, though I don't know why Chloe was in the living room building a crane from a magazine page and couldn't have heard us anyway. He started angry. "You destroyed my marriage, Mom. I hope you're proud of yourself." "I didn't destroy it, Nathan." I turned the lights on. What you're seeing was always there. He shifted the way he always shifted, the way his father shifted, from heat to strategy in the space of a breath. "I'll fix it. I'll buy Chloe a stocking. I'll call her dad. I'll put her name on the door. Whatever you want. Just tell Rachel to come home." A stocking. He thought a stocking would fix it. After everything, the notebook, the trust, the stitched name in gold thread, my son believed that the solution was a purchase. And for one moment I almost laughed, because the distance between what Nathan thought the problem was and what the problem actually was could fill every mediation room I'd ever sat in. "A stocking isn't the point, Nathan." "The stocking was never the point." "Then what is the point? What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand why a 7-year-old girl drew a picture of your family and put herself outside the house. I want you to understand why your wife handed out gifts to every child in the room and didn't notice she'd skipped her own daughter. And I want you to understand that those things didn't happen because Rachel forgot, or because Chloe is dramatic. They happened because you built a house where one child belonged and one didn't, and you did it so carefully that even the people living inside it couldn't see the walls." Silence. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "When you're ready to be the father, that girl deserves not just a man who shares a roof with her, but someone who puts her name on the wall and means it. The door is open. But it won't be a stocking that convinces me, Nathan. And it won't be a phone call. It'll be the look on Chloe's face the day she stops standing in the doorway waiting for permission to come in." He hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after, holding the phone against my chest the way you hold something that used to be warm. Being right about your own son is not the kind of being right that feels like victory. It feels like surgery necessary, precise, and nothing you'd volunteer for twice. Over the next 2 weeks, I helped Rachel find an apartment in Stamford, close enough that Chloe could stay at her school, far enough from Nathan's townhouse that the distance felt intentional. I covered the deposit and first month from savings, which is the kind of thing a retired mediator on a fixed income probably shouldn't do. But there are calculations that matter more than arithmetic. Chloe's room in the new apartment was the biggest one. Rachel painted her name on the door in watercolor letters, blue and green and gold, the colors of birds in flight, and they transplanted the cranes from the old room, pinning each one to the new ceiling until the constellation was whole again, the same quiet migration in a different sky. Rachel set up her laptop on the kitchen table and started rebuilding her illustration portfolio. It was slow. Freelance work doesn't pay the bills immediately, and there were nights I could hear the worry in her voice on the phone. But the worry sounded different from the silence that had come before it was hers, at least. It belonged to her in a way that Nathan's version of fine never had. I helped Rachel track down Chloe's biological father. His name was James. And when he answered the phone and heard Rachel's voice, there was a silence that contained 2 years of questions he'd been afraid to ask. They arranged a FaceTime call for that weekend. Chloe sat on my couch, holding my phone with both hands, and when James's face appeared on the screen, she held up a crane and said, "Look, Dad, I can make ones with straight wings now." I watched from the kitchen doorway. I didn't need to be in the frame. Some moments belong to other people, and the best thing you can do is stand nearby and make sure nobody interrupts. Kimberly called on a Tuesday. There was a long silence before she spoke, the kind of silence that's full of things a person is deciding whether to say. "I should have said something, Mom. At Christmas. At all of it. You still can, Kim. I don't know how." "You do. You're just scared. It'll cost you what it cost me." She didn't respond, and I didn't push, because pushing people past their readiness is not something I do anymore, not in courtrooms and not in families. But I left the door open, the way I've learned to leave doors open, without promising what's on the other side, but without locking it either. The night before Rachel and Chloe moved to the apartment, I went into the guest room to strip the sheets. Chloe had already packed her bag, a real suitcase this time, not a paper bag, and the room was empty, except for the lavender sachets and the bed, and one small thing on the pillow. An origami crane, crooked wings, uneven folds. The paper was from a magazine, a page with flowers on one side and an ad for dish soap on the other, and when I picked it up, something was written on the inside in pencil, in the careful, wobbly handwriting of a child who had pressed very hard to make sure the letters were clear. "For you, Dot." I carried it to the living room and placed it on the windowsill next to the first crane, the one from Christmas Eve, the one she'd made from wrapping paper while the rest of the family opened presents she didn't get. 2 crooked paper birds, side by side, looking out at the snow. Neither one had perfect wings, but they were standing. The house is quieter now. There's one fewer car in the driveway on Sundays. And some mornings I set a place at the table for Nathan before I remember and take it away again. And that small motion reaching for the plate, pulling my hand back, is the part that hurts the most, because it means my body still expects him, even when my mind knows better. But there are 6 stockings above the fireplace, and every single one of them has a name that someone chose not because they had to, but because they wanted to. What makes someone family the name they're given at birth? Or the one someone stitches into a stocking by hand? I think I know the answer. I think I always did. I just wasn't brave enough to sew it until a 7-year-old girl standing in my living room in a coat too big for her, holding a paper bag from school, asked me a question I couldn't unhear, and I knelt down, and I told her the truth.